Good afternoon, everyone. It's Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. This is a school board briefing, and the time is 2:30 p.m. Sergeant at Arms, has the front lobby been attended to? Yes. Thank you. Board Member Morgan is virtually joining us today. Ms. Morgan, I want to assure everyone that you're on the line.
I am. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. There are 8 items on the agenda. Construction change order report, July 2024, job descriptions, RSM presentation, policy review, academic outcomes for the 2023-24 school year, agenda review of September 17th, 2024, public comment and good of order or other business. Per board protocol, each board member should strive for 4 minutes for initial comment, 2 minutes for a follow-up, with a total of 10 minutes. We're going to begin today with the construction change order report for July 2024. Scott Rickenbacker is joining us. Welcome.
Good afternoon, board members. Superintendent Savage, Esquire de Prairie Bruno. This is your change order report as required by statute for July 2024. As you will notice, we had $1,735,633.92 in direct material purchases, resulting in a amount of tax return back to the district of $99,483.38. Indirect change orders in the amount of $123,405.32, with an amount of unused change order from projects returned to the district of $123,405.32. And we had contingency adjustments across the projects in the value amount of $76,526.97. The backup for that front sheet is the report itself. You'll notice that we had 2 DMP change orders, direct material purchases, with the credit that I reported of $99,000. We had 5 pure change orders. The first for Veterans Park was a DMP reconciliation. Next was a return of funds back to the district, unused project funds. The third was a no dollar, time extension only. The fourth was a return of unused project funds, and the fifth was a time-only extension, no dollars. We had 8 contingency adjustments during that period. All of the contingencies occurred at the Fort Myers Technical College freezer repair after the fire, the Alba School, Gateway Elementary traffic improvement, Gulf Middle School, HVAC, and Riverdale High School, as well as G. Weaver Hips Pre-K edition. Are there any questions?
Superintendent, do you have anything?
I do not, Madam Vice Chair.
Board members, any comments? Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. My question is regarding the Fort Myers Technical College. So because it was a fire, did the insurance pay for those repairs? And is that completed? Because I know that it's been quite some time that took place.
Yes, the project is completed, and we work with our risk management department. The insurance is covering the cost.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments, board members? Ms. Morgan, any questions? Okay, thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Next, joining us at the podium is Angela Montemarano. She's going to be going over our job descriptions.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Superintendent, Attorney de Prairie Bruno. You were received and briefed in your one-on-ones regarding some of the job descriptions that have been put in place for the briefing. These are all, most of these were a part of the budget. When we approved the budget, the job descriptions were not attached in that board meeting. So we apologize for that, and we have brought them forward to be approved at this time so we can move forward. Is there any questions from the board in regards to any of the job descriptions?
Yes, Ms. Patrica.
Excuse me, I don't have a question. I have a comment on the specialist 2 for ESOL compliance. It's my understanding from the superintendent that this is part of our effort to put more resources into our program to help our students, our ELLs, be better, do better, have better educational outcomes. I pointed it out during the budget hearing, and seeing this position be approved is another step in the right direction. Thank you.
Board members, any other comments or questions? Ms. Morgan, do you have any comments or questions regarding job
I have-
descriptions?
No, I have none. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the RSM presentation. Please welcome Wise Campbell and Matt Blondell.
Ken, while they're coming.
Yes.
Good. Good afternoon. Matt Blundell with RSM. Thank you for having us back. If you recall, I believe we heard July 31st. Was that the last board briefing that we were? 30th, where we discussed the internal audit plan for the upcoming year. We went through the risk assessment and talked about some of the options that we discussed with the audit committee in terms of internal audits for the year. During that discussion with you all, there were a few additional items that you requested for us to scope and develop budgets for. And so this presentation includes that information, and certainly we will go through those at a high level just for your benefit, and then we can certainly discuss which options you would like to do to move forward with the audit plan for this coming year.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Matt. Appreciate everyone's time today. So what you're seeing on the screen here are the 7 items that we discussed during that July 30th meeting. This is a product of the audit committee recommendations plus the ESC services component that was incorporated based on the request of the board. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly walk through high-level scope for each of these that was included in the SOW, and we'll certainly, we're receptive to any questions you might have related to that scope, and then we'll entertain any questions you might have that could influence the selection. So with that, I'll start with budgeting, which we have here on the screen. So this is a pretty straightforward review. This is really a review that would encompass an analysis of the accuracy, completeness, and the effectiveness of the controls around the budgeting process. This would include data verification procedures, how that budget is generated and ultimately distributed, and the budget modification process and the internal controls around that process, including communication. The second item here is capital planning. So this evaluates the effectiveness of the district's overall capital planning process. So this includes obtaining stakeholder engagement, how projects are prioritized, and the monitoring that's in place around projects that are selected. So we will do some detailed testing of the operational controls that exist, including an assessment of the alignment with strategic goals that are in place, as well as the criteria and methodology that's used as part of the investment considerations. The third item here is an IT-related review. This is a cybersecurity incident response. So this is specifically an analysis of the district's IRP process and incident response program. So this is a review of related documentation, specifically the notification and escalation procedures of any incident cybersecurity related that may come across a district's purview. So this includes tactical handling instructions and how these items are ultimately prioritized and addressed. So this specifically will be addressed through a tabletop exercise where we tailor specific scenarios and attack types, essentially just to align the organization with the industry trends and risks. So it's a simulated attack, and what plan is in place to actually address anything that comes out of that attack. Facilities maintenance is the fourth item here. It has been on our audit plan in the past, continues to be. It's a very prominent area, as you can imagine. So we will be looking at maintenance standard operating procedures to understand the coverage over maintenance, including the work order process and the controls around that. We'll do detailed testing of a sample of work orders to understand whether or not they have the relevant approvals based on the delegation of authority that's in place. We'll be looking at expenditures related to those projects and how projects are ultimately, or work orders, prioritized. Specifically looking at the preventative maintenance work order schedule. So we'll be assessing the process for procurement of goods and services, the management and administration of vendors through this process, and the monitoring and identification processes as they move through the work order completion process. The grant management review that you're seeing here is the next item. So this is really the district's overall grant management policies. This would include an analysis of the process for application, monitoring, compliance, and reporting related to any grants that are ultimately managed at the district level. So we'll examine the development and monitoring of grant budgets district-wide, as well as those segregation of duties that are in place related to those grant funds. So this will include some detailed testing of a sample of grant applications and to ensure alignment with management of the approved budgets and the accuracy of grant applications and reporting. Lastly, here is the ESE services. This review is very much compliance-driven. It would be looking at the process for approving individualized education plans, specifically looking at the delivery of those services that are outlined in those plans, and assessing the training that's provided to staff to meet those obligations. The last item on this list here that we have is follow-up testing. So as a reminder, follow-up testing is where our team goes back to previously issued audit reports to make sure that the management action plans are in place that were stated as part of those audit reports. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a consolidated listing of the audit reports that have open observations. So you can see we have a total of 38 observations across these 8 reports, with 27 of those items remaining open. So within the scope of the follow-up procedures, we will go in, take a look at the 27 observations, and make sure that there has been appropriate remediation as stated in the management action plans. So pretty straightforward process through the internal audit function to make sure that management is fulfilling their obligations.
And then the last slide here is the proposed budgets for each of those items. I don't think we have anything yet. Yeah. So certainly happy to answer any questions and to discuss through what the board's intended audit plan would be for the coming year.
Superintendent, do you have any comments?
I do, but I would defer first to the board just to hear some board conversation. That way, in case it folds into anything that I'm thinking, I could participate at that point. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to go to Ms. Morgan first, since she's on the line. Ms. Morgan, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to be responding to, but I will say that I'd like to hear a little bit more about the budgeting one in terms of communication and distribution of reports. I think that particular area probably is really vague from a stakeholder point of view, and if the point of the audit is to provide some suggestions to the board regarding more transparency in that reporting, that would be greatly appreciated. I sort of feel as though cybersecurity that's not high priority for me. Because I think that team has been evaluated and obviously is doing really good work. Grant management has new management, so they should definitely be checked. Facility maintenance, I'm not sure. You know, we've had problems off and on in that area, so maybe it is valid. ESE, I think that the looking at the delivery and training of staff to meet plans is critical. We have new leadership there. No, we don't have new leadership there. Forgive me, I'm thinking of something else. But we continue to get comments from parents about that, and I think it would be helpful to the board to have RSM look at the delivery and training of staff to meet these plans. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Any others? Mr. Persons?
There's 7 possibilities here. Do y'all feel like that's too many for y'all to handle, or do you feel you're equipped if we were to choose all 7? Because normally you don't do that many in one year.
Correct. We could, but you're right. We wouldn't necessarily expect 7 in a single year. You know, typically for a district of this size, we'd look at probably 4 in a year, especially considering that the goal would, of course, be to get it done by the fiscal year end, so we're already looking at a condensed timeline. But certainly, we were expecting you to, pick a few of these, but not necessarily all of them.
Okay.
And sorry, just for context, we did perform 7 projects, the same number that we're showing here this past fiscal year. So certainly within our capability, but it's certainly within your discretion there.
Thank you.
Board members, any other comments? Ms. Patrica?
This is different from what everyone else has talked about, but I look at slide 6 and I wonder, I'm not at all concerned about HR. We're undergoing a complete transformation there, so having 4 out of 5 open observations does not concern me, but the rest of them, seems like we have an awful lot of open observations. Am I reading that wrong?
Several of those, just looking at all of the ones from 2024 were fairly recently issued, so that's 14 there, we wouldn't necessarily expect those to be closed yet. Certainly, there's a few stragglers, like in contract compliance, those are all still open. There's one still open in purchasing. We would expect those to be closed out generally by this time, a few years down the road. And I think, I'm recalling our prior conversation, I believe we did talk about this, where at first we were not doing annual follow-ups, and I think we're starting to move towards that to help drive a bit more accountability and to retouch these, because I think certainly with purchasing and contract compliance, it had been probably 2 years since we'd even followed up on that. And so moving more towards an annual follow-up process, I believe will help tidy that up a bit and help to close some of those out quicker.
So I guess maybe to the superintendent through the chair, as part of your comments, questions, if you could address why you feel those are still open, that'd be great. Thank you. Those are my comments.
You want to follow up?
Just one more piece of context to provide there. We find often in our reports, we have an estimated completion date. A lot of the items may have a longer lead time depending on the nature of the remediation. If they're looking into centralizing a function or implementing a new software, that can take a longer time. So that might be why you see it. It's not always necessarily just a lack of commitment to getting something changed. Just want to add that context.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? Ms. Giovanelli?
To piggyback off of what Ms. Patrica was saying, I had noticed that as well. I'm concerned over the contract compliance I realized that was in 23, but I mean, we still have 4-on-4 there, and I would like to have seen some of that change. So, I mean, I am concerned over, especially when you see the half-cent surtax. There were 5 observations and there's only 1 left, one open. So, I mean, I see that we are moving towards, making the changes, but certainly the purchasing and procurement one still hasn't opened, and I'm concerned over that, and that comes back from 2021. So I am concerned over that. Also, regarding, I was curious if you wanted us to prioritize your 7 list, but I would agree with Ms. Morgan regarding the ESE is a huge and pretty much number 1 on my list, because I get a lot of phone calls, and I just had an email this week that I let people know regarding an ESE student that was regarding their testing and not giving per their IEP that they were supposed to be allowed the time for testing, or the actually, they go to school later in the day or in the morning, but there was no accommodations for the student to take the test. It had to be at 7 o'clock in the morning versus he goes to school at 9. So, I mean, I just think we need to be following. It's important that the ESE follows the law, and department and the staff and teachers are understanding what that actually means, because I sometimes question that when I see they don't deviate from their schedule for the IEP that's planned. My other thing that I would consider would be important is the facilities maintenance as well. I agree with Ms. Patrica regarding the cybersecurity. We know that our team here has been on that, and we put a lot of money towards that. I think they really work diligently on that. The security plan, the cybersecurity plan. Capital planning, we're building schools, I think that's really important at this point in time, because we kind of a little bit, we need to talk about, or we need to make sure that the community understands, and I think if we have that audited, I think making sure that we're in the right direction, doing the right areas where the schools are needed. I think that's really important, as well as budgeting. Those would be my recommendations. But ESC is really important, and that's just my comment. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. Two of my most important ones are ESC and facilities and maintenance. I think those are two ones that really should deserve some merit in looking at those ones. Question for the board. I know we get our RSM monthly dashboards, but talking about going back to looking at follow-up testing previously issued internal audits, what about looking at perhaps having during our future workshops like a quarterly update on where we're at with where we've completed those previous items? You know, seeing where we're at that, maybe hit like a quarterly cycle or something on that. Just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding, just for those of you who are listening. Mr. Persons?
Well, I know our cybersecurity is very good. I also worry that that's probably where we can get into most trouble. I mean, because it's changing daily. So I just would feel much more confident if it was audited to make sure that we're up with all the latest problems. I assume y'all have an expert on top of that. I've talked to you, so I know you do, but anyway, I just think another set of eyes on that, because the risk is huge, you know, and so I just would feel more comfortable. The others are all very important too, but I would like not see, and that's one of the least expensive ones, but I would like to see that kept in there.
Any other comments? Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I just, I'm going along with my colleagues over here, but I definitely think the follow-up, because I know for years now we've had this conversation about once we've had these audits done, where is the follow-up? So to me, that is really important to get these closed out and make sure that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. And then with the quarterly reports, I think that's an excellent idea as well, to bring that to us so that way we keep informed of what is taking place there. The ESE, to me, is definitely a main one. And grants, I think we're going to wind up getting a workshop coming up on that to see where we are doing better, or the process that we have for that. Is that right, Dr. Savage? Through the chair.
Yeah, Madam, through the chair, yes, we have a couple grants presentations. We have one that's coming, just closing out our ESSER piece, but then additionally beyond that, also some return on investment and procedural aspects of how we can try to get, know that we're getting the right amount of value for the different grant funds we spend as well.
Thank you. And then also the facility maintenance as well. And that they would be my priorities. So thank you.
Okay, so I think the question is, do we want to have them continue to keep all 7 as a priority on our list? Should we, and this is board discussion, so I mean, I think the consensus is certain about ESE, if I am reading the room correctly. And capital planning and facilities maintenance. I agree with Mr. Fisher about the follow-up testing. A quarterly report would be great. I agree with, you make a really good point, Mr. Persons, about the cybersecurity, because it's one of those things that while we're doing such a great job, we don't want to take our eye off the ball, because that's a very vulnerable area. For me personally, exceptional student education is my top of mind. I've seen far too often kids fall through the cracks, and my own personal experience writing IEPs and 504s in 5th and 6th grade, they got all that way without one. And then they're significantly behind. So that's my own personal experience when it comes to being in the classroom. Do we want to keep budgeting as one of the priorities for our auditing? Yes, Ms. Jordan?
I guess at the end of the day, we have to look at, because they presented all of these to
Yeah.
us, and it's about the money. So we know what the cost is. They said they could do whatever. Do we want to spend all this money right now for all of these in this year? Or they're, I mean, I think that's the bottom line is.
Sure.
Do we want to spend
Yeah.
all of this money?
Anybody want to follow up from Ms. Jordan's comment? Mr. Persons, then Mr. Fisher?
I just think budgeting with a new elected superintendent coming in seems a little crazy to get too much maybe into that right now this year, because she's going to probably, or he will probably be changing a lot of the stuff, so I'm not sure. I know we have to pass the budget and they prepare the budget, but I would assume the new elected superintendent's going to have a lot of input, and I'd like to see them make their recommendations and then maybe next year do the follow-up to see how everything's working. But not being a superintendent, maybe I, through the chair, ask the superintendent whether he thinks it'd be better to do it now or to wait on budgeting.
Madam, if I may?
Yes.
So just to answer that question, we, for instance, we just implemented a new budgeting approach this year to our schools. First year of implementation, I would definitely say it had its challenges, and operationally, we are still kind of dealing with those challenges, implementing that piece just because of it. So I think there's a fairness in kind of that comment. I think budgeting, I think all these are very worthy topics, without a doubt. If you're looking for an area that you may want to pare back just for sake of the scope of the year and the time frame, and allow for that depth and allow for that proper engagement, I think that that's a fine choice of one to potentially either consider for a follow-up year or so forth, or a secondary year, or put it more at the back end if that were something you were trying to do, only so that you would allow for a new superintendent coming in who may have recommendations around that area. That's certainly a possibility. They may also very well say, in this year, I want you to try to improve upon that piece. So it could go in a number of different directions. Because there's just a lack of maturity in the current approach, it's not like we are utilizing the system we've done for 10 years. Because it's a new system, I think by virtue of that, unless there were egregious issues that we would want to be looking at, I think that it's a fine candidate for one, certainly.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. Yeah, my suggestion would be pick our top 2 or 3, and then at that point, see where we get to, and then we can readdress the other ones. Thank you.
I agree. Do we want, go ahead, Ms. Patrica.
I would agree with the caveat that we keep follow-up testing regardless of what the top 2 or 3 are. So that would be 4, no matter what. Keep up with the, which I think is kind of what you said a little bit with the reporting.
So can we agree that ESC is one of the, that's our number 1? I think facilities and maintenance, I heard quite often.
Yeah.
Is that a thumbs up? Okay.
Yep.
And then either capital planning or cybersecurity. I mean, we're growing exponentially, so maybe capital planning or both. Okay.
I would say both.
Yeah, okay. Is that helpful? That's 4. And then we're going to keep the follow-up
Yeah, the
testing.
follow-up's in there.
Sorry, we had to add that
Yeah,
extra.
every year.
So just so I understand that correctly, no on budgeting
For now.
For now, maybe,
for this year's audit plan.
right.
Okay.
Unless you're super fast.
Yes on capital planning, yes on cybersecurity, yes on facilities maintenance, no on grant management, yes on ESE, and yes on follow-up.
Correct.
Okay.
I just want to check with my board that that's good. Miss Morgan, how does that sound to you? Are you still on?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Awesome, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Superintendent, Dr. Savage, do you want any follow-up there?
I had pieces, but I think based on where you landed, I really think this is a very reasonable scope, and I think you picked excellent categories. These are all areas that I think I would have picked as well. Just of wanting a thorough review, I think all of them I would want, but I think the ones you've prioritized in my mind are very fair for the organization as well. So I don't really have anything else on there other than if the board wants something specific. Oh, I did want to mention, sorry, it was an earlier question, a follow-up. So while I definitely agree, we want to make sure that we have the RSM follow-up piece as well. I just wanted to also highlight for the board, one of the things that the job descriptions that was presented to you earlier, and this again, as it goes back to when Dr. Bernier was still here as well, as the board considered moving towards a board auditor that's in another position, one of the things we had contemplated was shifting what is presently referred to as our internal audit department. Often very confusing. People hear internal audit department, they wrongly assume it's the board's internal auditor when it's really operational. It's really looking at our controls of how we do our audits in our schools. They audit our internal funds, and so that's often conflated. The internal funds, that is a primary part of their obligation. They also do testing against our policies and how they're being implemented in our construction projects to give you all as a board and a second round of look. But one other thing that we wanted to do as we move towards this compliance aspect is have them help to ensure that there's a proper organizational response from a management standpoint in this, and so you must have been sneaking in my notes somehow, sir. I don't know how you did it, but it was my offer to the group was quarterly updates on top of that. So not only you'll have what you have through RSM, but for us, we wanted to at least on a no less than quarterly basis bring information that managerially kind of explains and outlines if this is not unclosed. Why is that? Is it because of the adoption of a technology? Many of those things, RSM actually, when they presented to you last time, they talked about some of those issues that were needed to be done. However, that's something that internally we wanted to have as well. We just felt that it was important, but I just want to kind of connect that piece, that compliance, which many audits departments, for example, Miami-Dade, they have that as a part of. They tether that compliance side to the audit side, so there is a go-between, someone who can continue to work with them. It helps the management folks get those things done, understand it, gives folks who are familiar with audits, can help organizationally. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that as well in case you had any questions related to that.
Ms. Jordan.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, are you speaking about our in-house compliance that we just changed the name from auditor to compliance person to do this, which then would be working for the district? Or are you speaking of another person outside as they are outside?
Yeah. Right. No.
So I just want to make sure.
Great distinction. I'm sorry I wasn't very
clarification
clear. Yeah, we're not creating a new person. It's essentially to try to adapt the duties, knowing where the board had contemplated moving. We saw that this was an absent function that right now would be left to each individual chief, left to each individual director. This is an opportunity to consolidate that and support all the different operational areas within the district so that as we have identified areas, they are not only executing their function that they do today, which is the specific audits that they perform on our schools in terms of the internal funds, as well as the functions that they still do operationally in terms of construction projects and so forth, but also an added responsibility was tracking the compliance for these findings, and that could come through whether it's RSM, whether that's an audit conducted by or a governmental entity. It could be any of those functions, but it's simply for us to have a connection that gives the board that additional level of understanding of where we're at in that process of attempting to close those loops.
Okay, so then if a follow-up, so then RSM would literally, they would have to work or give the compliance person, compliance chair, compliance captain, what are they called?
I'm sorry.
Compliance.
Yes.
I apologize.
New to me as well. No, quite all right. It's, I believe, compliance, director of compliance.
Okay, the director of
But I'll double
compliance.
check.
So they would have to give the director of compliance all the information because they've actually done all the testing. They've actually done all the research that needed to be done to even come up with these findings. So then they would take those, they would work with that person we're saying, and then the director of compliance then would give us the information or turn it back over to
So let me,
RSM.
let me be clear, it still falls on management. Every individual manager to close out their areas. So when they're working and they're doing this testing, and we don't expect them to take our word for it. Again, any follow-up testing that's ordered is completely independent. But internal, as a method of enhancing our controls, is to have a compliance director, and that is the name, the Director of Compliance, which is one of the job descriptions you were briefed on earlier today. That is migrating the prior, what was Director of Internal Audit, essentially just trying to be clearer of what that job really, instead of using names, they're using position titles that are confusing to people. This kind of clarifies for folks exactly how those duties are. Many of them are unchanged, but it's making it so that our staff internally has an ability to work with a centralized function here to support them in closing these items as well. They have to do it. It's their work. They can't do it for them, but it's a person to kind of organize and provide administratively, so we have an awareness, so there is always someone whose eye is on closing these items, no matter if leadership changes in a particular area. That way you're not, if for whatever reason they didn't have it on the follow-up test, we're still working to close it no matter what. Ultimately, they would have to yield to you if, in fact, they find it to be closed based on whatever testing protocol they put forward, but certainly our obligation is, it's really administrative in nature in that sense.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mr. Persons.
Well, not being an expert, I would imagine some of these findings, you have different directors that need to even work together to get things done. I mean, it could be a IT program for a maintenance, and the compliance officer, I think, would help be able to bring those together.
Absolutely.
So I think that's great.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes.
if I may, through the chair, Dr. Savage, we do have an agenda item this evening, which is the full SOW, so I don't know how you want to approach that.
Thank you, Madam Attorney Bruno. That is important because the current one that we have is in its entirety. So this would require revision to that piece. So I'm not sure that we would be able to get those revisions made in time for tonight's meeting because it was brought forward to this meeting. So that would require the removal of those aspects. We'd have to do that work additionally. So certainly we could work through it and see if we could have something ready to edit the existing statement of work that was supposed to be voted on this evening. But in light of what you had listed, that would of course change the financial amount, would change some of those scope elements. If it can be done, certainly we would like to do that for you. But if it cannot, then it would require a delay until the next action meeting until that would occur.
Ms. Patrica.
Why can't I just pull it and make a motion to include the 5 areas we agreed to?
You can pull it and we can revise the document. The only thing is we got to double check the budget source and the amount that's on the agenda item. That will have to be corrected. So that's the only thing that I'm really concerned about. I think the board has already given pretty clear direction in terms of the 4 items. It's a question of getting the SOW revised. So it's those 4 items as well as the amount of the contract.
Follow-up, Mr. Fisher.
If we're unsure on that part of the budget, I'd maybe suggest just move it off to the next action meeting if it's really going to hold us back that much.
I agree with that. Ms. Giovanelli, did you have anything?
I agree.
So do we agree that maybe we remove it from tonight's action meeting and then move it to the following?
Give some time.
That gives you time to adjust any numbers?
So,
Dr. Savage.
Yeah, Madam, Chair, thank you for, so from our perspective, I just don't know how long the edits will take to get it done. My hope is that we could get it done. At the same time, I would want to defer to our colleagues over here to see what additional issue that may raise from their perspective as they are a separate entity. I'm just talking really from a logistical standpoint, getting these things done in this kind of speed of time, what we have.
Do you want to follow up with that comment?
We could provide an updated SOW in a half an hour. I mean,
Oh.
it's not, it's just deleting a few paragraphs and a couple lines. It's easy for us,
All right.
but I know there's a lot more that goes into it than just what we have to do.
Ms. DePabrino, are you comfortable with?
I'm okay with the SOW. I just want to make sure that our CFO and her team are ready to go in terms of revising the agenda item and the budgetary source. I don't know if it will be more than half an hour, if it can be done prior to the night, but I just want to make sure they have that opportunity to do so. Because right now, your agenda item reflects $400,000, and I know that's not what it's going to be once we take a look at the things that you have removed.
Okay, so how about, Dr. Savage, do you want to communicate with staff about this?
I will hopefully have an answer by the close of this meeting.
Okay.
I'm just kind of waiting for the work now that we have clear direction, because I do think we have clear direction from the board. If we can do this in the speed, now obviously if they're working simultaneously to get that would be great. And then if we can move forward tonight, great. If not, I just wanted to alert the board that in the worst case scenario, it would require a delay for the next meeting.
Ms. Giovanelli?
So I do have a question for the superintendent. The board auditor position, what is the status or update on that? We're all here talking about audit stuff. Thank you.
Yes, go
Happy
ahead.
to. Thank you, ma'am. So we, as pursuant to the last board direction that we had, they will be working directly with the chair. They have been, I haven't seen the resumes yet, but you may have, so you may already be a little bit ahead of me on this. So I haven't seen it, but our chief of HR is going to be working directly with the board chairman, who will then be working with you all. The goal is to get you information on a weekly basis. So you're kind of able to monitor that process, whether it's applicants, whether it's activity, so that you all can have an informed piece. But the chair will be your point of contact for it. I'll certainly be looped in operationally, but it'll be working directly with Ms. Montemarino on that work as well.
Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, Chief Montemarano was able to get some of those resumes over to me, and I was going to follow up with her, and we can provide more information to you guys and see where we're at with the process.
Thank you.
Perfect. I have confidence that that will be ready by the end of this meeting.
Just one thing, Madam Chair, just to make sure that we, I have to always say this, be careful which sunshine as we're going through this process to select the auditor. So there's several steps that we need to do to ensure that we're in compliance with the statute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is our policy review first reading. Attorney DePay Bruno is presenting, accompanied by Victor Orozco Zuleta. We will give her a moment to set up.
Okay. Madam Chairwoman, we are prepared. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed if you have anything, and then I'll start with comments.
We don't have anything. These are policies that I believe you've seen before. They were pre-briefed, and this is the first official reading.
Thank you. Anyone on the dais have comments or questions? Ms. Jordan?
Yes, I do have a question. Regarding the policies, a lot of them refer to the code of conduct, and I'm just trying to figure out how does that work if we're approving policies that are attached to the code of conduct, which the parents are supposed to have read already in the beginning of the school year and have signed. So how are they implemented into the code of conduct, and how are the parents aware of the new policies?
So it's my understanding that they will be implemented as the code of conduct is updated. It could be in December, it could be in the spring, because December there was some discussion with regards to a update relating to the cell phone policy. So if that occurs, then these would definitely be included in that, or it would go through the regular process.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure parents are aware, because it's hard enough to get them to sign the first one. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Morgan, do you have any?
I have none, thank you.
I just have one quick question. If we go to policy 4120, part-time extracurricular personnel, we have a lot of supplemental coaches, like assistant coaches, and we also have a lot of volunteers on our coaching staffs. Bless their heart, they don't take any money at all. They just donate their time. are we requiring, since they are around, other than their background check, are we requiring them to do training on CPR, AED, and all of that as well if they are just in a volunteer space?
So it's my understanding that everyone, this is statutorily required, that everybody needs to be trained. And I think in the past, actually, the district has been training volunteers and has been training casual employees and have been training the other individuals. This is something that as this policy and we continue to move forward with our processes, Mr. LaRosa would be in charge of ensuring, but everyone should be trained.
Okay, volunteer is not in the policy, so that's the reason I asked, because this is only employees of the district, and if we're requiring our volunteers, I didn't know if we wanted to include that verbiage as well, if we're able to. Or, I mean, it's sticky because it's a volunteer situation, but yet they are with our students.
So that's a very good question. It's something that we can certainly revise and bring forward if the board chooses to move forward with the second reading and the board wants to include that language, we certainly can do that. That would definitely clarify it.
Okay, board, any thoughts there? Anybody?
It needs to be clarified, it needs to
Okay.
be simple.
Okay. Do you have your direction to just change the, or add that verbiage in?
Yes.
Okay. Any others? All right, thank you.
Thank you, and the only thing we'd ask is if we have a consensus to bring it forward to second reading.
Are
with
we
that
okay
change.
with a thumbs up or thumbs down to bring it to second reading? Looks like a yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
you. Next on the agenda is academic outcomes for the 23-24 school year. We would like to welcome Dr. Nathan Shaker and Cheryl Neely to present to us this afternoon. Is she a doctor? I should have had that written down.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think she's maybe working on it or going or thinking about doing it.
Good afternoon, Board. Good afternoon, Superintendent. We're here today to talk about academic outcomes from last year, as well to cast a little bit of light on our academic focus this year. So we have 3 objectives in our presentation here today. We want to report on KPI Objective 1 and the outcomes related to our strategic plan. We want to introduce some first discussions on ESSA, not to be confused with ESSER. And its guidelines, its status, and its impact on our schools. We also want to highlight what the curriculum department is seeing and how we plan to respond in partnership with regional leadership. In Vision 2030, Objective 1 was to increase the percent of students who are achieving in all academic subject areas across all student groups. As it relates to KPI 1, in English Language Arts, we met our target this year. Our performance goal was 50%, and we hit that last year. In math, we did fall short. We were aiming for 58% proficiency, but we did hit only 53%. One of the things that will be highlighted in a little bit will be that it's really our algebra performance that pulled us down. There were other areas where we had a lot of success. Science, we did hit our target, 51%. We did make that 51% threshold. And in social studies, we actually exceeded it. 60% was our goal, and we made it to 62. The information that's being presented here is school grade data. So one of the things I just want to bring up real quickly, because we're going to talk about some other data, is the difference between school grade data and between raw data. Before we get to there, just an overview on FAST, where these numbers come from. FAST now does have 3 separate assessments associated with it. Our students just about 2 weeks ago took their first round of FAST. If you get any feedback that the scores felt low, that's very typical. It's a baseline assessment. Our students are being tested on where they would begin. So if a 4th grader is testing on 4th grade standards at the start of the year. So it's December that we really take a close look on. This is when our students have had a half a year of learning. and we really get a good idea of their progress throughout the year. PM3 is the summative assessment. It's the one that gets factored in for school grade. PM stands for progress monitor. It's one that factors in for school grade. And when we talk about learning gains, it is PM3 from the previous year to PM3 the current year. So this is the new fast testing battery of assessments. So just want to make sure we highlight the components of a school grade. Really the most significant changes that we've seen in the last year is that third grade achievement is now added as an individual item in the school grade component. So it used to just be bundled in with the other elements of reading proficiency. Now it is an individual component, kind of adds a lot of emphasis to third grade reading. Still has proficiency gains and L2-5. But the other place that we're going to keep a close eye on is our middle, high school, and combination schools. In order to achieve an A now, need to clear 64% of the points. That's an increase from the 62% that was previously there. Now I want to talk about a little bit of comparable data with our neighboring and peer districts. This is going to be raw data. And I just want to draw those distinctions because raw data is something we can pull, anyone can pull directly from the DOE website. It's a good kind of common ground to talk about the data between districts and something that's very, very accessible. So this data that we're going to discuss is raw data. Without going through every single item there, I hope you had an opportunity to review. What we see is a consistent trend that we are improving. We're seeing positivity. We're seeing moves in English language arts jumping from 45% proficiency overall to 47%. One of the concerns that I have, one of the concerns that we have overall, is keeping pace with some of those gains or some of those improvements that's happening in other districts and even at the state level. So it is a consistent trend across all the areas. We're making strides. We're going to have to do a little bit of work to keep up with our peers. We see this again in math. We had a point increase. But that point increase is we just got to keep, we're not moving at the same rate as the rest of our peers. When we talk about algebra, we did drop by a point. Now those big gains are not as large in the other districts that we typically compare ourselves to. But again, it's not keeping pace with a lot of our peers. The one that I'm trying to keep my eye on, the one that I'm most interested in studying is Pinellas. Pinellas has had a particularly good year last year. So we're starting to do some initial work and communicating with the superintendent in Pinellas and seeing some of the initiatives that they've taken. What's that? Pinellas. When it comes to science, we had a 1% gain. That 1% again, positive trajectory, but not quite keeping pace with our other districts. And lastly, in social studies, we did drop by a point in civics, but we went up 2 in U.S. history. Talking about school grade, ending on a positive note, we did have a lot of success throughout our schools. 19 schools earned an A this year. The ones highlighted in yellow with the asterisk indicate an increase of 1 or more grade levels. So Bonita Charter, Challenger, Cypress, they all jumped from B's to A's. And we did have another 30 schools that earned a B this year, and some of them had some great leaps. Again, if they're yellow and asterisk, it means that they've jumped up a grade level. Riverdale High moving up from a C to a B is a big success. Diplomat Middle, Calusa. We did see some positive forward movement. Veterans Park had a fantastic year last year. So we're going to start to transition, and Ms. Neely is going to help me out here today. She's a wonderful expert when it comes to ESSA, talking about state accountability, and we're going to do a quick little shift to federal accountability. This slide just highlights the history of federal accountability. It goes all the way back to 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I think when federal accountability really started hitting the radar, when people really started noticing it, was No Child Left Behind in 2002. A few years ago, almost 10 now, is when No Child Left Behind was rebooted, was updated, and it became the Every Student Succeeds Act. So when we say ESSA, it is the Every Student Succeeds Act and the requirements that fall underneath there.
Thank you, Dr. Shaker. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or as a ESSA, not ESSER, requires each state to create an accountability measure to meet its federal requirements. As you just heard, Florida's schools' accountability measures include the school grades, but they also include the ESSA Federal Index, which monitors individual student subgroups. This table provides an overview of the federal index. Take a moment to look at the index graphic. On the left, you will see the Every Student Succeeds Act indicators. And on the right, you will see the Florida components used to calculate the federal index. There are a couple items I want to point out. LG stands for your learning gains. LG L25 is your learning gains for your lower 25, since there wasn't clarification for that. Remember, this calculation is used to provide individual student groups with a federal percent of points index, also known as the federal index. You may have noticed that the Florida components for the federal index are the same as the Florida school grade components with the addition of one category. The additional category monitors the progress of our English language learners on the WIDA assessment. The WIDA assessment monitors language development for our multilingual learners. By calculating the average of these components, the school will receive an overall federal index and then a federal index for individual student subgroups. Here in Lee County, our predominant student subgroups are white, black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, English language learners, and students with disabilities. Next, we will discuss the ESSA categories and accompanying these federal outcomes. A school's federal index results will classify a school into one of three ESSA categories. Each ESSA category has an associated criteria relating to either a school's grade outcome or individual student subgroups' federal index outcomes. The ATSI, or Additional Targeted Support and Improvement category, is for schools with one or more student subgroups with a federal index below 41%. The TSI, or Targeted Support Improvement category, are for schools with at least one subgroup with a federal index below 32% for at least 3 consecutive years. Lastly, there is the CSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement category, to which there are 4 ways a school can identify for this category. 1, have an overall federal index below 41%. 2, have a graduation rate below 67%. 3, have a school grade of a D or an F. And number 4, have a federal index below 41% in the same student subgroup or groups for 6 consecutive years without exiting. This year and in years past, the School District of Lee County has schools in CSI status. These schools are monitored by the state's Bureau of School Improvement, or BSI team. You may be wondering, how do schools exit one or more of these categories? There are 3 ways for a school to exit or reset an ESSA status. 1, they have to improve any low-performing student subgroup's federal index to at least 41% or higher. 2, they have to have an overall federal index of at least 41%, have a school grade of at least a C or higher, and have a graduation rate above 67%. And lastly, schools that enter CSI category because of a low-performing student subgroup or groups for 6 consecutive years must raise that subgroup's federal index to at least 41%. Let's look at our schools by region and how they relate to the accountability measure we just discussed. Let's begin with the regions at a glance, followed by school-specific information. That school-specific information is going to be specifically 3 areas. 1, it will have overall federal index for the schools, their ESSA status, and then student subgroups that have been identified for improvement because they're below 41%. So the North Region has 14 schools with at least one subgroup with a federal index below 41%, 3 with at least one subgroup consistently performing below 32%, and 2 with a school grade of a D. The schools that fell within the CSI category will receive support and oversight from the state's BSI team. The North Region actually has 2 schools, both Bayshore Elementary and Manatee Elementary, that have reset all subgroups because they have a federal index in each one of those categories above 41%. The East Region has 10 schools with at least one student subgroup with a federal index below 41%, 4 with at least one subgroup consistently performing below 32%, and then 2 with a school grade of a D. As a reminder, the 2 schools in CSI status will receive support and oversight from the state's BSI team. The East Region has 1 school, Mirror Lakes Elementary, that has reset all their subgroups with a 41% federal index in each one of those areas. Here's the South Region's overview. 14 schools have at least one student subgroup with a federal index below 41%, and 3 with at least one subgroup that is consistently performing below 32%. The South Region has 5 schools that have reset their subgroups. That's Fort Myers Beach Elementary, Sanibel School, Pine Woods Elementary, Bonita Springs Middle School, and Rama C. Page Elementary. Lastly, let's review the data for the West Region. 17 schools have at least one student subgroup with a federal index below 41%, and 1 with at least one subgroup consistently performing below 32%. The West Region has 4 schools, Challenger Middle, Gulf Middle, Diplomat Elementary, and Littleton Elementary, that have reset all student groups with a federal index above 41%. I will now return the presentation to Dr. Shaker to discuss Academic Services' response to this data.
Thank you, Ms. Neely. Thank you. There is a strong partnership between regional leadership and academic services going forward. I want to highlight some of the initiatives that we are going to focus on to address not only the concerns coming forward with ESSA, but also what we're seeing overall in our community. Academic services focus really this year is going to be to build capacity, to find and create the best tools around, and then to seek out innovation going forward. A big part of that is state alignment. Following from those three, our three keys to growth this year, first is building capacity. Within the capacity structure, when we focus only on directly coaching teachers, we limit our scope and what we can accomplish. We're identifying teacher leaders, we're training APCs, we're guiding PLC leaders to spread our expertise wider, to spread their expertise wider. We are reimagining our delivery of training to support beginning, intermediate, and expert teachers where they are at. We are also focusing on the tools required for the trade. Overall, we want to increase interactions and we want to use technology as a tool. Centers are great, they can work in middle school. They especially in early middle school. Sixth graders enter with a lot of knowledge that is coming from some of the good practices that take place in our elementary schools. We want to continue that small group instruction. If you remember algebra tiles last year that Dr. Cupid McCoy taught you, the use of manipulatives, this type of learning where the computer is closed until we need to practice what we've learned, this is a powerful approach. By refining assessments to make sure that we are checking for the right information, we are increasing the time spent on instruction. It's a big piece of working with our tools. And lastly, the innovation side. As of about 2 weeks ago, we currently have 23,717 students who are identified as LY. So they would be in need of support for ESOL services. We have 12,426 students with an active IEP. Those together get us to about 40% of our population needing either support as a student with a disability or support as a second language learner. This year we had preschool training focused specifically on quick supports for ESE and ESOL. ESC did a strong presentation on taking a multi-sensory approach, ways to adjust a lesson to make it more visual, audible, or tactile. And ESOL is putting a very specific focus on academic vocabulary. One of the things we know about our second language learners is that the only language our ELL students sometimes practice is social language, and making sure that we are emphasizing the significance of academic language as we work with our students. We're also focusing on attendance, on goal setting, on scheduling from the beginning of the year and the impact that that can have on our students in the long run. And I wanted to just draw a connection between academic services and student services. Resiliency Florida is obviously our approach to, in Florida to working through resiliency. Based on the data that was just presented, one of the Tier 1 strategies that we can use relates to building resiliency in our students. Teaching them grit, teaching them responsibility, and teaching them perseverance are going to be key to increasing their academic performance. Likewise, as leaders approaching this challenge, we're going to have to use resiliency as well. We're going to need to be honest, we're going to need to use critical thinking and problem solving, and we're going to need to show perseverance in our pursuit of growing our students, growing our student population. Now, I'm confident that that has brought up a lot of questions. So my recommendation is a presentation from regional leadership highlighting some of the collaboration that's occurring. I recommend a progress briefing in January 2025 around the performance that we're seeing from the second progress monitor. It's very much in the spirit of the testing the battery of testing that we do with the state now. And a briefing on the status of ESSA and our BSI schools in whatever way works best for the board. So to that, I turn it over to the superintendent and the board for any questions you may have.
Dr. Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would love to hear the board member questions first. I do have some comments, but again, just like before, I really would rather see if you all have any of these questions first, and then I can also provide answers or follow up with anything that you would like on that as well.
Thank you. Board members. Mr. Persons.
Slide number 32, where we have 40% of our students in either the LY or IEP. Do we have any data of other districts where they fall into those categories? I mean, to me, that's more important how we relate to them than how we relate to even an equal size or a neighboring county. Because I mean, now we're looking at apples to apples instead of apples to oranges.
Totally.
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to. That's a great question. So that's one of the fascinating things we thought about doing in a region was to actually start to have some more apples to apples. So rather than looking at Lee County always in this giant aggregate of data, breaking it down and really be able to compare, are there more apples to apples comparisons? So what we've done is actually there are different districts that we've looked at that do have more comparable numbers. It probably won't surprise you to find that areas such as like Lehigh, for example, when you talk about the rate of our second language learners, our English language learners, rather ALLs, in our East Zone, for example, that's 1 out of every 4 students falls into that piece. And so that is a very, very high rate. And so really statewide, you don't find very many districts at all that are perfectly demographic comparisons to that. And as you look at other districts around our state, whether they're more comparable to Cape Coral, whether they're more comparable to Estero, Bonita, so forth. And so I have actually identified a few of those peers. We didn't bring it into today's presentation because there was a lot already there in terms of orienting this, particularly ESSA, which we know is a very critical topic right now. We wanted you to kind of get acclimated to those regional pieces, but certainly we will have some demographic comparisons and kind of show you some more apples and where possible apples to apples comparisons.
Mr. Persons, follow up.
Just to follow up, yeah, I would love to see that and to see how we not only do with them, but if they're doing better, I'd like to see a follow up to see why are they doing better, you know. And I think we could maybe learn from some of the other districts that have similar ones. Maybe they've had it longer or figured out a better way. That's all. That was my reasoning for the question.
Mr. Fisher? Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Vitrica?
So to follow up on that, I would also be interested to know what the rate of growth has been in those other districts. So the last time I looked at this was around 2 years ago, and we had seen a 47.5% increase in our ELLs over a 5-year period. So I wonder if other districts have seen that explosion as well. And in terms of looking at what works in other districts, we're just now starting a new process here in Lee County, so I'm not sure that now's the time for that comparison, because we've got to give, is her name Sawida? Is that her name? We've got to give her a minute to sort of get her feet under her and show that what she's doing is going to work. On a separate note, also on slide 32, I wonder where's the innovation for our general education students and for our higher flyers, for our students who are, you know, taking IB or gifted students, where's the innovation there? It's important for us to provide innovation for all of our kids. And then finally, as I looked at the slide with the data, I didn't write it down. The slide number, I mean. Slide 4. I compared that to our June briefing, and the data does not match up. There was sort of the sky is falling attitude back in June when this information was brought to us. Again, it was early reporting, it was not full reporting based on actual year-end information, but I'm looking at the data from the June briefing, and it's reported differently today. That might be a piece of it. But in addition, the data given to us today is far better than what we were told it was going to be back in June. So I'd like to see just sort of an explanation as the reason for the differences. Perhaps if we break down today's data the way it was broken down back in June by grade and by subject, that might be helpful for me to understand why the differences are there. Those are my comments for today. Thank you.
Do you want to
Allow me,
Go
if
ahead.
I may.
Sure.
So that we attempted to, so great questions, again. So they did attempt to kind of give some context for that. The first piece on the slide that's on the screen right now, slide 4, they mentioned that this is drawn from school grade data, and they were very intentional in making sure folks know it's matched for Survey 2, Survey 3, full year enrolled, so that it's accounted for, you're held accountable for that piece. However, in the same presentation that we have here today, so if you just kind of scroll forward a bit, right here, and that's good enough, you can stop right there. It's the same data. This, of course, though, is the raw data. That was the data that was presented because, of course, they hadn't released school grade data yet because they had to do the Survey 2-3 match. That doesn't get released until the end of July. What's critical to kind of note as you look at this information right here is that you did see the increases. That information was in the June briefing that showed the increase. If you look at the gray row where it says state of Florida, and again, this was articulated today during the presentation. So Florida, for example, in grades 3 through 10 ELA. Last year, Florida was 49%, as you can see in the leftmost column. Then 2024, this most recent year, they now went up to 53% achievement for a 4% positive increase. Down below, where we were 45%, then up to 47%, again, raw, so all districts being measured in the same way, because everyone has this piece and it's all publicly available, we went up 2 points. Grades 3 through 5, state of Florida went up 3 points, we went up 2 points. 6 through 8, state of Florida went up 4 points, we went up 1 point. 9 through 10, we went up 5 points. I'm sorry, we went up 4 points, state of Florida went up 5 points. So in each case you see a widening. If you go to the next slide. Next slide to math, please. State of Florida, gray column, 51 to 55%, a 4% increase. Lee County went up 1 point. In the 3 through 5, the state of Florida went up 2 points. We did not go up at all. We maintained the same. Middle school, 6 through 8, state of Florida went up 4 points. We went up 3 points. Next slide. Algebra, state of Florida went up 3 points. We went down 1 point. 8th grade and lower algebra, state of Florida did not change. We went down 1 point. 9 through 12, state of Florida went up 4 points. We went up 2 points. Again, you see the gap widen. Next slide, science. State of Florida went up 2 points. We went up 1 point. State of Florida went up 2 points. We went down 3 points. Biology 1 EOC, state of Florida went up 3 points. We went down 1 point. Next slide, last but not least, civics. State of Florida went up 1 point. We went down 1 point. U.S. history, went up 5 points statewide, we went up 2 points. So in each case, in every subject area, in every single grade level group, the gap with the state widened. That's the same data, the same information with minor pieces to it. Go to the next slide. 19 school A's, 7 of which charter schools. So I share this as context because the sky was not falling. No one said the sky is falling. No one's trying to create a false sense of urgency around it. And I think was articulated again today, we're being transparent of we went up, we achieved the goals we set, but the goals we set allowed us to fall further behind the state. Everyone else, the state doesn't have its own schools. We are a part of that state aggregate. And unfortunately, we are lagging. To the earlier point made about innovation, very important to say that it isn't just what other districts are doing. In fact, we have schools within our district right now that are setting the curve in some cases based on their ability to meet the students' needs and ones with challenges. I want to highlight one in particular, East Zone. If you go to the East Zone slide, go to the regional East Zone, one that has closed all of their subgroups is Mirror Lakes Elementary. Incidentally, it's one of the highest value add, not just in 4th grade, 5th grade, ELA, math. No one can say that the East Zone is easy, that they have all the additional resources, yet one school within that particular area set the curve in terms of the value add. So this is an example of work that is being done locally in a school that's right under our nose, where excellence is being achieved for students, all students, students with disabilities, minority students, so everyone. That's the type of thing that internally, what didn't come through in part of the analysis of what Academic Services is doing is they're visiting some of these schools. They're going to see where the exemplary value add is occurring right under our noses, the curiosity around not just what districts are doing at scale, because like Pinellas is a good counterexample, right? So Pinellas, and again, this goes back to growth that you're talking about, Pinellas happens to be one of those schools that's actually losing students. Significant numbers of students are now coming out of that system. So, you have to be careful when you have students exiting the system because you may look like a district is actually doing quite well, but in some cases, they may be losing different populations of students. So it's very hard. Whereas within our system, we can track every single one of our students. We know where they are, allows us to analyze these pieces. So I want to make sure I was very clear. Number one, we did achieve some of the goals we set. Number two, we clearly fell further and further behind the state. The data is still in this presentation I want to do. But third, absolutely part of the intentionality of this work that's happening with the regionals is to study these real exemplary models. I think it's essential. My hope is to clarify that so for everyone and also for the public, for anyone who didn't come through clearly. So I'm happy to answer any follow-up on any of those items as well.
Ms. Patrica?
So I appreciate you going through and reading the slides to me again. However, it doesn't help me to really compare to what was given to us in June. So if I could see it just broken down the way it was given to us in June, that would be super helpful. I don't think it'll take very long because we're looking at slides 13, 14, 15, 16, and just plugging in end of school year numbers. That would be super helpful to me in order for us to understand how far we came. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. I'm actually going to disagree with Dr. Savage on this. I feel a sense of urgency when I'm seeing these scores and seeing us compared to the other districts. So I don't want us to fall further and further behind. In looking at things, how does it go into with the data and the models changing for school grades from year to year? How does that work with our KPI, like how we set it from initially comparing? I don't know if that's, who wants to answer that one?
I'll be happy to answer
Through the
this.
chair.
Yeah, just so again, one of the biggest issues, of course, the addition of the third grade piece. You see also the difficulty in setting a target without really understanding the changes in the assessment from year to year and so forth. So having our target set as kind of a static piece, the challenge is you could achieve your goal, but again, fall farther behind the state. So I would say that's something that as we onboard a new board and a new superintendent, one of the first orders of business is to ensure that we are looking again at the strategic plan and really reviewing the metrics that we've set, because one of the last things that I would ever want to do is set goals that we achieve and then we fall further behind. And so you can absolutely operate around that. there are ways to do it, to empirically set your goals so that they aren't in any way arbitrary, so that they're based upon a sound logic. And in some cases, that requires not picking a specific number, but instead a benchmark of moving up potentially in a ranking or things of that nature. There's different ways to do it, but that's something that would take more time, not for today, but I would say that as we onboard that new board through our annual activity, reviewing the strategic plan, I would love the opportunity at that time to kind of share maybe some of the changes we could make from the metrics that we utilize. For example, a district like Pinellas chooses a fundamentally different way of looking at the way that they track their scores. They moved away from this model that Orange had used because they felt that it did not allow them to continue the type of growth and improvement they needed to see, the high expectations. So that's why they did not. We met with them in their strategic plan, folks who created it, and they strongly advised against the methods that we used here. So those are just things that we'll bring, that we'll have more in-depth board discussion as we talk about that in the future, unless the board would like something sooner than that. But that was the plan, was wait for their new seated board, review the plan, review the metrics, and determine if you wanted to enhance any of those approaches.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, because my concern on that is our own internal goals might look good, but compared external to what's going on in the other districts, then it looks completely different. My other question is, and I don't know, and I don't need to answer this today, I don't know if this is possible. When we're looking at our own schools, is there any way to measure data-wise other programs and activities where certain schools might be performing, not even just demographics, but maybe arts and music, ones that have STEM, maybe how they deal with their AR program, those kind of things, where they're at with that. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of way with that, or academics looks at that.
You want to follow up?
Ma'am,
Yes.
thank you. Well, that's a great question. We don't have those designs right now, but that's something that programmatically there's things we could look at, and certainly we'll be able to provide some follow-up.
Just a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan, do you have anything?
Okay, yes, sorry. Can't always unmute easily. Some of the things that I'm interested in, they've already suggested bringing forward at another meeting. For example, I would love to know what it is that BSI is doing for the district. Armor Person's question about subgroups and how subgroups compare in other districts. So I have two questions. One, there's no data about, or you haven't shown us data about the subgroups and where the issues are. If there are some subgroups that are throwing us off, that are creating a greater problem for us than other subgroups. It's not clear to me when we talk about a general plan to address what's going on, whether a general plan is going to address differences within each zone, which is why I'm interested in the subgroup data. And then I guess I have a question about how do you teach resilience? To me, it's not about teaching resilience. It's helping kids find their grit. And I'm not sure, I just wonder if our teachers have been trained in something like that, if they, where is our emphasis? It just seems like we have a lot of general goals, but I don't see a particular problem that's being addressed by a specific goal, because I just don't believe that, and I know I'm not being clear, but I just don't believe these are generic. I believe they're very specific to schools and areas and cultural problems within schools and ways of work within schools. So I just think there's a heck of a lot more that we have to be shown as a board, particularly if people are going to think about reflecting on the strategic plan and what it calls for. Other school districts may have a different strategic plan or a different process, but then they're different than we are. And So I guess what I have to say is I find this information overwhelming, very confusing, and frankly, not comforting in any way with respect to understanding the problem and understanding how we're responding to it and whether or not the regional model has anything to do with our ability to combat some of the challenges we face. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Dr. Savage, would you like to follow up?
Thank you, ma'am. So thank you, Ms. Morgan, for the questions. So if you go to slides 21, 23, and so forth for each of the regions, what they give you is a breakdown that identifies each school, and then to the far right column, the specific subgroups that have failed to reach the desired threshold, the 41%, which again sounds like an arbitrary number, but it isn't. Essentially, the way the state model, I was actually up in Tallahassee when we filed our state plan. We were one of the last 2 states to file our plan, and Florida writes their plan to essentially meet the state, to meet the federal requirements. What Florida wanted to do, to make it simple, is keep our school grade model, utilize what we do in school grade, but apply it to all kids, all groups within the school. That's the long and short of what they did. And so that's why you see the similarities in that piece with just very minor exceptions to that. So in each of those data tables that you have there, you'll see to the far right, they've identified the specific subgroups that have failed to meet that threshold that are keeping that school from clearing all groups. So when you heard Ms. Neely talk about clearing the group, when you see a blank, like in this case, Bayshore and Manatee, you have seen schools in our district that have cleared, they have achieved above that achievement threshold with all of their specific groups. But then to Ms. Morgan's point, you can see the themes. And you'll notice something that's not unique to Lee County, of course, is that students with disabilities, as we mentioned earlier, ESE or in the audit conversation, tends to be one of the subgroups that most districts are still struggling with. As you move down to the East region, you can see very much the different groups that have been identified, and any of those groups that have those consecutive did not reach that threshold, they're identified there. And then so forth, you can see which ones have cleared it by having, they're all green. When you get to the south, the same, you can see there. So if you want to go school by school, you can see and which ones are there. And then when you get to the last one, the west zone, you can see those ones specifically. And so that gives you kind of in a quick version all of those specific subgroups that you were concerned about, so you can kind of see where those things are. I'm just going to go back to the one that I mentioned earlier, Mirror Lakes, as an example. And I could go to others, but Mirror Lakes is one that stands out to me because not only did they meet the criteria here that you see in front of you in achievement, but their value add, which again has a lot more to do with our ability to discern what's the value we're adding by our systems, our process, our instruction. And what you'll notice with schools that really have extremely well-developed approach to instruction, the way they assess, the way that informs teaching, is that it's good for all students. And that's an example of a school that is taking care of all their students and doing so consistently. Not only are they showing up as a success story in this achievement-based scoring, but they're also showing up in something that's far more nuanced and far more sophisticated, which is that value add side, which is showing very high numbers as well. So I just wanted to try to answer those concerns of that piece. I would defer to my colleagues if they want to speak any more about anything that I've shared, as well as the resilience comments that were mentioned, because that is obviously new for Florida to kind of call these. This is honoring really the state of Florida-based approach to resiliency. If you have anything you'd like to add.
I was just going to say, it's very hard to beat Ken to a data conversation, to beat Dr. Savage to a data conversation. As it relates to resiliency, if teaching was the wrong word, maybe modeling is the better word. And encouraging our teachers, showing our teachers that they need to set goals with their students, that they need to encourage their students to push past difficult times. PM1 provides a really unique opportunity for this. As that baseline set, and students can sometimes come back very disappointed with how they perform, our teachers having a great opportunity to kind of discuss growth and help them monitor how they grow throughout the year is a great way to reinforce grit and resiliency.
And let me just jump in for a minute. This comes back to what we've said about expectations and accountability. Resilience comes and grit comes from expectations met, not met, and how you respond to them, and how people in your world help you respond to them. Thank you.
Ms. Neely, did you want to add?
Yes, I would like to add, and there is a skill to resiliency. That skill comes when teachers and educators and parents provide their children with opportunities to struggle and productively struggle, and talk about what that means and what you've got to go through in order to get through that, right? And it requires grit. It requires self-awareness and learning about yourself, what it feels like to challenge something, overcome that, and that way you build back stronger each time. So part of what the regional superintendents, as they go out to schools working with principals, is being purposeful with their walks. Not just about benchmark alignment, which we've worked on the last couple of years, but really being strategic about walking and looking for what does it look like in the life of an ELL student as they enter a classroom throughout their 7 hours at that school. Is there time for them to read, write, speak, and listen in English? Is there an opportunity for our students with disabilities to do the same? Read, write, speak, interact with the challenging content at the same level we're asking our advanced students to do those same processes. But that requires all of us to be on the same page with that accountability that was just talked about, having high expectations for all of our students. And that starts with the tier 1 things in our room. Staying benchmark aligned, having high expectations for every student in every class, regardless of the level of that course, and making sure that we're intervening strategically and purposely for individual students, while building in the opportunities for enrichment for our advanced students. And so those things have to be very, very strategic.
Thank you. Anyone else? And then I'll give mine. Ms. Giovanelli?
So first of all, thank you for this. I'm excited to see what January brings because I love what you said, Mrs. Neely, about modeling. We have 4 new region superintendents, and instead of looking at from one administrator looking at all of Lee County, they get to focus on their region. And I think that in itself will help you hone in on exactly what the needs are in each of those regions that we haven't done before, because it's too difficult for a couple of people to really look at Lee County as a whole. And there are different pockets, as I think was Miss Morgan, that has different needs. And I think that was one of the reasons that that the superintendent chose to break it down into 4 regions, and because it's I think you're going to get more out of less, if that makes sense, because your opportunity is going to be more centrally located, and I think that your success is going to be better. So I'm excited to see what happens in January. I thank you for all this work, and I think I can't wait. So I understand the numbers, and I see there's room to grow, but now we know where we are really, and I think breaking it down into 4 different regions and with 4 different eyes that come back together to talk about it and collaborate is going to be a big difference. And I'm glad you got grit for it. Thanks.
Mr. Fisher?
Very brief. I just want to go back to one of my prior comments. I do appreciate the hard work and the seriousness of this work by Dr. Savage, Dr. Shaker, Ms. Neely, and the rest of the regionals, as well as Dr. Jennifer Cupin-McCoy. I just wanted to thank you and thank you for this presentation.
Mr. Persons?
I yield my time to Ms. Jada Langford Fleming, who is waiting to speak.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is why I hate going last, because you keep stealing my thunder. You've said the word model 3 times, and it's right here. So I actually think that this presentation is broken down very well, and I think this is the way the public can also understand what is going on in the district. And I really appreciate that. I also think our teachers can look at this and understand these numbers. So I've always wondered why, I know we go and we look at other counties our size, and then we look at our neighboring counties, but we are such, and when I was on the campaign trail, I discussed this not with just constituents of the community, but also with fellow educators. Our county is so unique in its diversity, which is why I think that the regional superintendents is going to bring so much value to not just our principals, but all the way into the classroom and touching the lives of students, which is what we're all really here to do in the first place. I do think that there is a sense of urgency, and while I appreciate the hard work that's going on in our ESOL department, keep persevering, keep pushing through, keep implementing this new and innovative way of doing things. But I don't think we have time, and as a former employee of this district and others, I don't think we have time to sit and wait and see if something works. Because what happens if it doesn't? And then we start this whole process all over again. And it's so frustrating. And I know it's frustrating at the top, and it is most certainly frustrating to our employees to constantly be cycling through something every 12 months, something coming to the table. Why? I just don't, I've never really understood that. So while I appreciate the hard work that's being done, why not go reach out? And back to my point about other districts, I think it's really important to look at what's going on in the state of Florida especially, but because of our uniqueness, we have some outstanding schools doing it right here. So I feel like we could go and ask our fellow employees, what is it that you're doing? And this shouldn't be an envious thing, a jealousy thing, I'm going to do it better than you thing. This is a team. I'm all about teamwork makes the dream work, and this is a collaborative effort all the way from the East Zone to the South Zone to the West Zone. We can all learn something from each other as long as we're willing to be transparent and vulnerable enough to ask questions. And I think so often employees are afraid to ask questions because questions are seen as a weakness and you don't know what you're doing, and that's not okay that we make anybody ever feel that way. My other point, 2 more points and I'll go quickly. I actually love the concept of Resiliency Florida. My goodness, if this county hasn't learned how to be resilient, I don't know what county has. But when I look at this from a parent, this is what I want to see my child's school implementing in the classroom. And I don't care if it's in my daughter's 5th grade classroom or my son's 12th grade classroom or 8th grade classroom. But these concepts are, quite frankly, some of the reasons that I walked away from education, because these were being plucked out of my daily lesson plan to be fulfilled with data and stats and testing. And I, as an educator, didn't feel like I had the flexibility to implement these really important things into my classroom for my students, because after they leave me, I've got to pass them on to someone else, and I want them to have responsibility when they get there. I want them to have grit. That's one of my favorite 4-letter words of all times. I want them to be grateful. I want them to think by themselves. I want them to appreciate the country that we live in. I want them to feel like they have somebody that they can always pick the phone up or go talk to. So to me, you're right, you can't teach this, but we can sure as heck model it. And I am challenging the district to be able to do that and to allow our teachers to be allowed to do this in their classroom. Innovation-wise, I got to visit a school recently that does, and it's not one of our schools, but thinking outside the box. I loved when you said centers, because I've always wondered, why does that end in 5th grade? That's so sad, because that's the fun in learning. The concept of flip lessons. I was watching a lesson, and it's a science teacher, and she goes above and beyond, and her homework is a pre-recorded note-taking class. So she pre-records her notes. That's the student's homework. So they go home, they learn how to take notes as if they were really listening in a lecture. Now, this is a secondary classroom, because when they come to see her, that she is able to use that entire period in a science lab. So instead of using half of it for note-taking and being rushed through the science lab, I thought, what a simple but yet effective way to teach a lesson. And I'm sorry, I'm going to try to wrap it up. I do want to bring out, though, the one slide that talks about our schools, the highlighted slide. All those schools, I applaud them, but I just want to give an extra applause to Riverdale High School for being able to increase the grade and the amount of construction that the school has gone through. So obviously those students are being taught resiliency because they're doing great. So, and that's all I have. Sorry for my lengthy comments. Any others? Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the review for this evening's meeting. Dr. Savage, do we have any questions or any agenda review items?
Madam Chair, we have received no questions for any of the items for this evening.
Okay. Next is public comment. Attorney DuPay Bruno, do we have any public comment this afternoon?
No, we do not, Madam Chair.
All right. We will go ahead and move on to good of the order, other business. Ms. Morgan, since you are still on the line, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, Mrs. Giovanelli has sent 2 very strong emails to the superintendent about transportation. Transportation was on my one-to-one with Dr. Savage. I sent him an email beforehand asking him to tell me who was on the org chart, what the skills and experience that required were, whether or not there had ever been any leadership training or development for anybody who was a supervisor, manager, director, chief, whatever. And I learned in my one-on-one that the superintendent was totally unaware of this transportation problem because he doesn't see the transportation emails. I think we have a problem in transportation, and normally I would not, step into what is an administrative area. But I think we as a board need to be clear about our expectations. We had expectations built into the strategic plan in terms of operational outcomes. One of the things we had built in was bus drop-offs and pickups times. We haven't seen that schedule. We had a board member who walked an area where there were parent complaints about transportation. I'm not aware that anybody from the transportation department or the superintendent did that to check that site out. That was done under last year. I just feel as though transportation is not getting the attention that it requires. I mean, it is the way kids start school, and it's the way kids end school, and it's how parents feel about the end of school. I just think that we need to be doing more in terms of diving into their processes. Are they responding to communications? What's the turnaround time? If there's an allegation by a parent or a staff member that there's a safety or security problem in transportation, how long does somebody sit on it? How aware is the superintendent or the COO about that situation? So I'm just using this time to ask the board to consider whether or not there is sufficient evidence of a problem in transportation to direct the superintendent to start providing more attention to, more information to the board so we can provide appropriate oversight. And those are my comments this afternoon. Thank you.
Dr. Savage will follow up.
Yeah, I think we have different recollections about me being unaware. I am completely aware, and what I said is that these are routed properly. Depending on what the nature of the different allegations are, they do get routed to various different sources. So for example, if they deal with fraud, waste, and abuse, they may end up in the Lighthouse. process. If they are related to specific supervisory issues, they get routed to specific supervisors. If it's about those supervisors, it goes above to them. And I can just say, just to recap again, there's a whole lot of folks who are really digging into transportation right now. Certainly, obviously, it's part of the COO's direct piece, but HR is all over it. They are working hand in hand with them. They've met with them numerous times. We've had even our legal team has been out to our pieces. I mean, there's a lot of folks who are attempting to get to support what has always been one of the most challenging aspects of it. And then when you add on top of that transitioning where you have different, folks flipping to different compounds in terms of leadership and so forth, that brings a whole nother level of difficulty to it. So no, definitely aware so I'm not really sure where that misunderstanding is. And certainly the intention is to give it the attention it deserves and the levels of support that it deserves and direction and follow up and follow through on every single item. I would just say that takes time. It's not something that has an immediate prompt resolution where tomorrow transportation is, clicking on all cylinders and everything is right, on-time deliveries and so forth. We're happy to send a list of the most recent drop-off and pickup times as those things are automated through our system. Happy to make sure we put something in the board weekly that kind of summarizes some of those late arrival times in the morning and the afternoon. Happy to do that. But other than that, that's my response to that particular piece.
Ms. Morgan, do you want to follow up?
No, I have no follow-up. I guess the only question I would ask is we pay a lot of attention to developing leadership skills in the academic area. I guess my question would be, to what extent do we provide management training to supervisors and directors and people like that in management and administration who are not in academia or the academic sector? That concludes my comments. Thank you.
I think it's an excellent question. So one of the first priorities for Dr. Cupid McCoy and myself when we really during this time period was really looking into our current approach to providing leadership support, not just for school-based principals, school admin, APs, and so forth, but really our entire central leadership. That includes coordinators, directors, all the way up to chiefs. What support systems do we have to ensure that chiefs, executives, directors, coordinators are building the competencies? Do we know what those competencies are? So that's a body of work, and Dr. Cupid McCoy is the lead for that. She's someone who absolutely has had a variety of different roles in her experience, having served as chief of staff, deputy superintendent, supervising principal. She's done so many different things that to me she was the most qualified person to really provide that insight. And so she's helping, and of course there's folks she's working with HR and their specific executive who's over that area is Dr. Johnston as well. So there's a whole lot of folks working on that piece, but I would say Dr. Cupid McCoy to me is the instrumental part of that equation as well.
I just want to respond to what Ms. Morgan is stating, because I do believe that nothing definitely against transportation, because I know how hard they work, but I think that we definitely need to see how we can help them more, whatever that looks like. We just really need to, I see Ms. Giovanelli's email that was sent out to everyone multiple times, and I've not seen if that was corrected or anything has happened with that. And I know even today, I know the kids have little scanners now that they scan when they're getting on the buses, and I was just notified that my 5-year-old granddaughter was put on the wrong bus and now she's back at a school. So I don't know how we do that when there's scanners to say that child is supposed to be on that bus or not on that bus. So whatever, I'd be willing to ride a bus or do whatever I have to do to help as well. But I'm just saying we need to give them the attention that they need to do their job, the tools that they need.
Transportation is, I've been out to the barns and watched them. It is so stressful.
It is.
Because we have, number one, too few drivers. So I don't care if you're the director or supervisor or even the bus driver. When you get there and they say, we're 10 drivers short today. We need people to double up on their routes. That becomes stressful. They're going to be late. Then you have all the calls coming in, and they're trying to get everything figured out. So we've got to, get those bus drivers hired. I know they're doing a lot of interviewing and trying, and we're paying for the license and everything else now. But until that gets done, we're going to be in deep trouble. I don't care who it is as director. Not that I'm giving them a pass, they do the best they can, respond. But if it was me, I would probably walk out. I don't know if I could take it, because it is very, very stressful. So I'm amazed they do as well as they can. Add that to the traffic and the lightning after school and the rains, everybody's late. And you have substitute bus drivers. There are a few of them, and that's where I think a lot of those mistakes get made. So it's very difficult. But overall, till we get more bus drivers, it's going to be a problem. I don't care how much we train or do anything else. That's the number one priority, just like getting enough teachers in the classrooms, our number one priority for academics. That's all.
Mr. Persons, do you want to give your good of the order? We'll just go this way.
Thank you. I have nothing right now. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Jordan?
The only thing I would like to, a follow-up on maybe, I've heard several constituents have contacted me regarding because of the buses, a lot of parents are driving their kids, so just trying to get their kids dropped off, which is making the child late for school. So now they just got their interim. As soon as the report came, well, the PM1 just came out. And as soon as that came out and the grades were shown and it showed how many times that the child was tardy, I received multiple calls on that saying, well, it's not our fault that we're standing in line and we can't get our kids, no matter how early we go, we can't get our kids in the schools. So they're being marked tardy, and then whatever at their first period that was supposed to be turned in when they first walked in the door is not being accepted because they're already beginning their class. So I don't know how we fix that. But I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
Dr. Savage, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm not really fully sure I'm understanding the question, honestly.
Okay, so the question is, I'm a parent, I'm dropping my child off, I'm in a line that's taken me an hour, and trust me, I've stood on the corner and watched the traffic go down, so that is very true, and I've done it more than one day. So trying to get in some of the schools, it takes forever to get their child there, regardless of what time you drop them off, because you can only drop them off at a certain time. Because, of course, they're not there until a certain time. So when the parent is dropping their child off, that end of that line, which could be 3 miles long, by the time they get there and the kids get signed in, they are tardy. Then they go to their classroom, which their classroom teachers, doing their job, they're starting the class as they're supposed to. And so there's those kids who are coming into the classroom late. If they have, like, some of them have assignments that are turned in the very first periods, they're not allowed to, they don't have time to turn in their homework, so their grades are being.
Understood. Okay. I think I
that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I said I would share that, so I'm sharing that information.
And so I'd be happy to look at some schools to see if we have any disproportionate tardies, that they're kind of indicative of that type of problem, just because it'd be helpful maybe, as we know, some schools, based on the drop-off lines and so forth, but usually by this time of year, they've kind of got it worked out, where folks who maybe ride different buses, a lot of those things start to get resolved by this point. But if there are individual schools that are really still seeing an issue of that, I would just highlight that to us, so that we can have their regional kind of put a second eyes on it, and then look at some of the tardy data to see, is it truly like a systemic issue, or is it really more of just an individual situation type of thing?
Sure.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Patrica?
Because it's been discussed, when we go into our one-on-ones, the superintendent asks, what's on my plate, where are my concerns, and my number one and only this week was transportation. So it's, I think it's on everybody's radar, and I'd like to see it approached with a sense of urgency. I hear you that we're having a hard time hiring bus drivers, but leadership needs to remain calm even in difficult times. My comments for today are about ITF, Insurance Task Force. I had that meeting last week, and several decisions were made regarding various insurances. One was cancer coverage. That's one of them. There are two other things that go along. FSA. And that's a change. The FSA is a change, and we were assured that it would not be disruptive to employees because education is taking place surrounding that, and any money left can be transferred without interruption. And then I think the cancer coverage stayed the same, or did it change? It stayed the same, so there'll be no disruption there at all. So those votes took place, and then there was a pretty lengthy discussion surrounding insurance, health insurance for next year, and staff does a great job working with Aon to present different options for employees to consider. What I realized, this is something else that Dr. Savage and I have talked about quite a bit, is the us versus them mentality that's sort of been created and gotten far worse since we've seen changes in union leadership. I have never looked at our administration versus Talc and Spalk as being an us versus them thing. I've always seen it as we're all in the same boat. However, the us versus them mentality is growing and, in my opinion, making it much more difficult for us to make strides moving forward. I strongly encourage the superintendent, as I did in our one-on-one, to train everybody associated with this on interest-based bargaining with an outside disinterested party to come in and teach all of the interested parties how to get back to interest-based bargaining, because what I saw in that room was not interest-based. It was us versus them, and it wasn't the staff in this building. It wasn't us versus them, Talc and Spalk. It was basically Talc yelling at everyone in the room, and I was like, whoa, we are doing our best, our level best to work from a very finite amount of resources to stretch it and do what's best for our employees. I don't think anyone sitting at this table has any interest in doing anything other than what's best for our employees, because if we do what's best for our employees, our kids benefit. So ultimately, that's where we want to be. I'm just not getting the sense that there's buy-in. The other thing that I'll mention, I probably should mention this in ITF instead of at the table, but I'm going to do it. When we sit at that table, it is one side, and we need to integrate. You know, we need to be sitting, I need to be sitting next to Talc, and people from the district need to be sitting next to our Talc and Spalk members instead of it literally being across the table from each other. I think that might help break down some walls. That being said, ITF is still really fun because it's a lot of numbers. So I'm hopeful that we can get back to a more collaborative approach to compensating our employees. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Ms. Giovanelli.
I don't have much. I just want to thank y'all for bringing up the transportation issue, because it is something that I am concerned about as well. There's a couple different things going on there. There's issues with not enough bus drivers and that kind of thing, but there's still a cultural environment issue, and everyone needs to be valued, and we're somehow missing that from the changes that needed to happen and the plan in place. So I think that's something that should be in our one-on-ones, is what the plan was. What did we learn from a couple of several investigations prior to this, and now there seems to be more issues. So, my concern is that we get the resources there that are needed to be successful for all parties, and not lose any more other employees because of the culture and the environment. Ms. Jordan brought up something, and I had an issue. A parent contacted me regarding their middle schooler. It's actually, the parent says it's his fault. The dad says, I forget to give her the lanyard, and she's missed the lanyard, and then she's put in a detention. So I don't know what the policy is when a student doesn't have their lanyard. like, because a missing classroom time is a problem for not having the learner, and the parent is taking full responsibility. Apparently, he's contacted the school because that's what I directed him to do, but the school, as of the other day, they had not gotten back with them, and he had called several times. So I am concerned over that as well, because we know that students need to be in the classroom and have instructional time. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things briefly. I attended my Drug-Free Lee Coalition meeting last week, and their Drug House Odyssey at the Civic Center this year will be on January 28th, 29th, and 30th, just so you'll have that ready for your calendars, and they're going to be looking, as usual, for actors for that from our schools. Second thing is just wanted to give a kudos to our regional associate superintendents. The amount of positive feedback I've heard on all of them and the amount they're getting out in their communities is impressive and refreshing. So I really, really appreciate them. And on top of that, I want to let my board members know, if you haven't seen it, there is a wonderful podcast with Mr. Spicker with our regional associate superintendent. So check it out. That's all I have. Thank you.
I just have one thing, and that was, we have this conversation all the time, but it doesn't seem to kind of go anywhere. So I don't know if this is something we can workshop or what we can discuss in our meetings, but I continue to get communication from constituents about, and students about our lunches and our breakfasts and what they are being served. So as of late, the most recent I got was OnStar testing day. Students were served Pop-Tarts, honey buns, and blue colored applesauce. So while I wouldn't eat that on a non-testing day either, I think it just was something, it was alarming to some people. And I just feel like we talk about it a lot. We've been talking about it since I got on this board about our food, and we're such advocates for health. And I know the Insurance Task Force talks about it often, about not just our movement, but what we're putting in our body. So I would just, at some point, I really feel like we need to follow up with this and have a real conversation. Ms. Patrica?
Thank you. So Congressman Rooney was one of my favorite ever to serve us in this region. When I first got elected, he was also first elected, and we were supposed to have lunch together. I invited him to lunch at Bonita Middle because Bonita had the full menu of federal programs. And so I wanted him to be in a school to see all the federal programs. And I have a picture of him looking at the food. Honest to God and true, I will show you. It's in my phone. I have a picture. So the food issue goes back far. And I think a big part of it is the federal limitations in terms of the nutritional guidelines necessary for us to continue to get federal funds. But it certainly is worth a briefing or a whatever so that we can express our concerns and maybe learn, and is making changes to make the food better going to make us lose our funding? I don't know. Those are things that make me concerned. I just want
Thank you.
to share that.
That's comical because I look at it like that too. I brought this topic up in my legislative platform discussion with Ms. McDougal because I feel like we're going to need some help financially with it. Ms. Giovanelli, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, this week I sent you an email from, I'm trying to think of her name.
Yeah.
Yes, and they do fresh foods, and I asked because she knows that we're 100% free lunch, and they can work with that totally. I think it's something we need to probably. They're willing to come and give us a sample and show us the food at a briefing or whatever, how it works. I've sent that to everybody and for y'all to do your own research a little bit, but they promise that the food is 10 times better and it's fresh. And they have menus and the kids like it. They have kids that tested it like before they even, they give their seal of approval. I would be more curious about it myself. So I would love to have this conversation if it means a workshop or whatever. So I support it.
Ms. Jordan, follow-up?
I would be willing to have a workshop as well. However, when you look at, and I know because I produce food, I make food all the time, but when you go to, I was at one of the schools last week, And that one kitchen, 17 members strong, feed, they do 2, 3, almost 4,000 meals because they take care of 2 schools. So when you have 17 people making that food, that's a lot of work that they're doing to make that happen. So, and I think that, simplistic is always good. So if you're prepared, and we have our gardens that we already have, utilizing our gardens back into the schools, I think that's given them a fresh, perspective as well, and fresh foods in their body. So we have those ingredients here at our schools. We just need to use them more.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I just feel like we've talked about it so many times, so we haven't really solved any problems there. So, but that's all I have. Ms. DePay Bruno?
Thank you, Board. So I want to go back to Board Policy 4120.08 because I was processing a lot of information and I don't think I was very clear and I may have given you misimpression. The statute is not the one that is mandating that the volunteers have the CPR or AED. Statute specifically says paid employees. FHSAA guidelines uses the language strongly encourages volunteers to get the CPR and AED, and also says that either an employee of the district or a volunteer must be there who is certified in AED and CPR. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. And with that said, to be more in compliance with the guidelines as well as the statute, I think we leave 4120.08 as is. 9200 is our volunteer policy, and I can add language in there that would mimic FHSAA, strongly encourages to have the CPR and AED certification.
Can I follow up a question with that? And Dr. Savage, you might know the answer. Within that policy, obviously those trainings cost money. Do we ask our volunteers to pay for that?
I would have to research that. This was in my notes as well to highlight this issue that was only for the paid, not the volunteer, but we'll certainly be able to get that information to you all as well. Certainly for us, just in the realm of we want to stick to the law, what the law requires, as well as strongly encourage, no problem there, but we certainly wouldn't want to have less. Knowing that a paid coach has to oversee that area, you know that at least someone who is there does have the proper training, so that does make us safer. It follows in accordance with the law. I would echo the sentiment that we only echo that language instead of going beyond it and then potentially having unintended consequences, especially setting policy where I haven't been able to get with the staff to find out. They were very clear with me in providing that documentation back that no, this is just for the paid folks. But I'll get that answer to the board as well.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Is that all?
That's it. Thank you.
Dr. Savage, do you have any closing?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Just one, you already checked off the volunteer coaches piece, so that's done. I just wanted to also take a moment to highlight Ms. Sawida, our director for our ELL program. Her experience, particularly in Miami-Dade, which is really at scale one of the most effective systems in terms of high value add in terms of a lot of different type of student groups. She found that to be instrumental in bringing a lot of that here. So we're certainly leveraging that. I didn't really get a chance to highlight that earlier in the other presentation, but I want to make sure I connected that piece. One other piece that was mentioned specifically by Ms. Neely that I just think is so important for this board. A lot of times there's talk about programs or what are other districts doing, so forth. Absolutely the number one most critical aspect of what moves instruction for all students is benchmark or standard alignment of the task. So what are students actually doing in the environment that is truly reflective of the level of the sophistication of the task that they have to be able to do? That services students who are below achieving, making sure they have proper scaffolds to do that, as well as high achieving students at every level of the standard. And that's really why those growth metrics are some of the best metrics we have. I just want to further reiterate that not only do we have certain schools that really pop in terms of that piece, but we have individual classrooms where teachers are setting the curve for the entire state in our district. So in the earlier comment that you made, Madam Chair, where it was talking about, we have some teachers here doing it, we have significant evidence, and in some cases over multiple years, that the methods that are being applied in some of our classrooms are absolutely the very best, among the very best in the entire state of Florida, and they're right here. The problem is, of course, they're not really being deployed at scale. And so that's part of the work right now, is looking at those pockets of excellence, reviewing them, seeing what those methods are being applied right under our own roof, and having curiosity just to do that, rather than saying, do it the way I say. It's to say, where does the evidence suggest high-level students, because when Ms. Patrica's comments earlier, because absolutely, we have to be taking students who are already coming in, kindergartners who can read. How do we ensure that we're providing the same value there? High-level math, middle, elementary, high, wherever it is, how do we know? Well, we have evidence. We actually have the metrics to be able to see these things, but we have to be looking at them, and and that is work that is also occurring right now. Not just but we will also, in conjunction, also be looking and continuing to partner with other districts as well. So I didn't want to leave those pockets of excellence internally. I also just want to highlight the systems that we talk about when we talk about resilience. I just could not agree more. And I really appreciate the framing that the state of Florida has in terms of their resilience model, because the reality is the hard part is taking that to system scale. It's one thing to call them out. It's one thing to have these specific things like grit and so forth. But another thing is, how do you inculcate that into your way of work and supporting students at all grade levels, developmentally? How do you do that? It's very challenging work. But I would argue that's the right work. Systemically, I would say if you gave me a choice between building grit in a student and having them master the third grade ELA standards for a particular quarter, I'd pick grit any day of the week, because those, and it's kind of encapsulated in that piece, but we don't have necessarily the measurement systems in place to be able to capture some of that important information. So that's work that lies ahead, but I'm just very grateful that this board kind of contemplated and gave power to those pieces. I just want to highlight about the interest-based training. Again, I just want to echo the sentiments expressed that the interest-based, nothing can hurt to have folks hearing collectively interest-based training, kind of bringing all sides together, because we really do all want our kids to succeed. And on that note, I just wanted to highlight our SPALC president, who brought me one of the, what she was calling military lunches. Instead of eating lunch one day, I took one of those bag, it was called that. That's not what we call it. It's definitely not military rations. It's not what it is. They're definitely not this one and the same. But she brought me a bag for lunch one day, and that became my lunch. And she will attest, I ate every single bite. And not only that, I went back and had more of this meal. And I will say, it left something to be desired. There were aspects of it that were very tasty, but some of it was absolutely very difficult to eat. And so I would just say, part of the challenge, and you heard this at the budget, but I ate every bite of it. And, Ms. Jordan knows how much I like to eat. So but it was a real accomplishment. I still have some of it in my office as well, just because I wouldn't ask our kids to eat something, right?
What you ate is still there?
No. That's all gone. That's all gone. Because, again, we're wide open to different partnerships, whatever we can do to try to get this. I will say the biggest challenge from how it's been kind of relayed to me is really something that was brought up to the board during the budget piece as well, is really the revenue side of this. That is the funding. The funding as it pertains to the food is a real challenge. And so when you heard that CEP district, just the method of accounting for how we're getting the funding for it to provide that piece, it's all about, you give folks more money to it. So this is not going to have an easy solution, as Mr. Patrica mentioned. When I was a principal, I heard it all the time, but I'm a kid who loved school food. I would actually sell the lunch I'd pack from home to buy it, but that was when they used to make the food. Yeah. So it was real food, hot food they'd make right there. It wasn't just packaged and whatnot. So we'll continue to work on this. We will certainly set a workshop for this board to be able to go into it. I know that was something Candace Messenger, our Director of Food Nutrition Services, wanted to do anyways. Maybe we'll have some food brought forward to you all if you're brave enough to do it. In addition to the garden program, that's something we mentioned as well, because our Elise, while she's looking out for our SPALC, and she did address our board, her focus on that particular day, as she mentioned to me again, was all about kids. It's all about the students. And I really appreciated that piece, because I think all of us can agree we want to put our kids first. And that lunch does no good if it gets thrown in the trash. That said, we'll have constituent services follow up on some of these items. That's one thing I want to remind the board. When you have individual issues that are like a lanyard or so forth, it isn't the expectation that you all are the ones seeing that to closure. That's really the type of thing that if the school is blowing them off, and that's the perception you're hearing, then in some cases that constituent service, they document it. That's Kim Baxa is the liaison for that piece. They document it. They can document the phone call. In some cases, what you're hearing, it's not exactly, there's the truth, two different sides. In some cases, it is. That documents that there's If the principal or isn't addressing it, then that principal supervisor gets enlisted. So it's just, that's our organized process. When they come to us, they get routed through those same processes. So I just encourage you all, if you find yourself in the weeds of some operational item, know that that's an avenue that's available for you, because that documents it for us so we can see these systems. If we're seeing the same repeat issues at certain schools, that's very helpful data for us to know that certain schools are not being responsive. So great examples of that earlier today. And that's what I had for you today, unless there's any other questions for me.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan?
Just one quick comment. Dr. Savage, I don't think we ever get in the weeds.
No.
I think that that's our job. So if someone calls us or sends something to us, we need to listen to what they say and bring it forward. So I just want to make sure that I never felt like ever that I'm ever in the weeds. I don't know about other people, but I'm just saying.
And I didn't mean it to, well, I guess what I mean is as board members, I know your role in the governance level, that if we're not, if we're talking about individual cases at an individual school level or an individual complaint level, the way that we typically want the organization to be able to respond is it is handled to the operational side of the organization. Our group that we have that is dedicated solely to that task is constituent services. And I want to make sure I told the board members that so you're aware that's a group that documents it. That way we have a record of contact. So if a person says, for example, no one's called me back, and they're emailing you that, because of course you can listen to anything as a board member, right? You'll hear it. But that person on the other end, maybe you'll say, well, actually, I've talked to them 7 times. And that's happened occasionally. We've had comments made here where it's giving voice that there's a culture problem. This is a great employee and so forth. And sometimes we have evidence that's been collected to the opposite of that piece. And so we just want to make sure I brought it forward so that you all know our goal is that you can have the confidence that those things are documented, that they will receive follow-up. As it pertains to the investigations, just know that those are not quite quick. Those aren't things that sometimes if there's an allegation made that gets funneled through an investigative process of any kind, whether that's HR, otherwise, those can take a significant period of time before they come to closure. So those are not always quick. Even if they are issues that have come up before, they have to basically get addressed, and that is a time-consuming process.
So I had asked him to send an email. He did not send an email, so I'm assuming he finally got it resolved at the school level, which is what I asked him to do first. But my concern was really, if students don't have a lanyard and it's, I guess, habitual, do they have to go to detention? Is that a normal thing? That is, do we have a policy that does that? That was really the question, and I apologize that that wasn't delivered that way. So that was my concern. The instructional time, that was really the concern. And also, before I forget, we have the art showcase tonight, so somebody could mention that. Thanks.
It's in my notes. Today, we will reconvene for our regular action meeting at 6 p.m. We also extend a warm invitation to members of the public to join us for the annual Designs and Dreams exhibit. This distinguished event is the largest student art show exhibit in the state of Florida, featuring artwork from Lee County students across grades K through 12. This exhibit will be held in our building from 5 to 7, and we look forward to seeing you participate and your support. And I think they're putting some art up on the screen right now. At this point, having no other business to become before this body and seeing no objection, this meeting is adjourned, and the time is 4:47 p.m.
Ken.